Hey there, let's take a look at an overhead squat assessment with myself. Good morning. All right, so to start, we're gonna get those feet underneath our hips, toes facing forward, heels facing back. I'm gonna go ahead and sit my sit bones back. And as you can see here, my arms are falling forward. My feet look like they're actually staying pretty still. At some point, my right foot was turning out a little bit, which if your foot is turning out immediately, it's calves. Soleus gastrocnemius. My knees look good. They look okay. They're not caving in. But the arms are definitely falling. The arms are falling down. Don't have too much of an arch in the low back. Low back arch is anterior pelvic tilt, which means hip flexors are tight. We believe that the lats look like they're tight, which is why the arms are falling down also. However, what I've decided to do here is take the calves out of the picture to see if the arms will actually be able to stay up, and I am able to prove that. So what I've done here is I've opened up my stance, pointed my toes out, which makes it easier. And then I've also got myself elevated on these blocks here. And as you can see here, my arms are pretty high up. So that kind of makes me feel as if it's not so much the lats and the pecs, the chest pulling the arms down. It's really a tightness in those calves, as well as, in my case, potentially a lack of ankle mobility. Look how tall my arms are here. They're right by my ears, not really going too far forward in front of my ears. My shins were more parallel with my arms. So we'll try another assessment. The pulling assessment, pulling and pushing assessment typically have very similar indications. In this case, I've done a good job, I would say, of keeping my low back flat. My low back is not arching. My head might have gone forward just a little bit, but that's typical for the digital age when we're on our phones, on our computers, and in my case, for my job, leaning forward, head protruding forward. So, got the foam roller. I'm going to do some work here. Let's start with the calves. My number one problem. So what we're going to do here is search and destroy. We're going to find a spot that feels pretty terrible, and we're going to be perfectly still on that spot for about 30 seconds, or in my case, I like to count 30 breaths in and out through the nose, very softly, very gently, and very quietly. Staying very still. My hips, I've made sure that my hips are up. I've done a lot of wrist strengthening, so my hands, my wrists don't have a problem holding my body up for a period of time. I like to find at least a couple spots per body area. And what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to go a little bit sharper, use a sharper tool for the calves, considering it's such a problem with my I guess my alignment right now, my posture. Again, finding a spot, searching medially towards the middle, towards the inside part of the calf, searching laterally towards the outside part of the calf. So when you're trying to find a spot, you can roll back and forth until you find one, and then also left and right until you find one. Sometimes I find one when I actually start rolling laterally. And just take your time. Now I'm going in for that sharper tool. I'm taking this contraption I've created, which is a double lacrosse ball with electric tape rolled all over it, so it's nice and tight. And I'm sticking that right under my Achilles because, hey, if you've been someone as a female who've worn high heels for a good amount of your working life, then your calves, your Achilles are going to be tight. So I'm doing the same thing. I'm basically rolling, trying to press my hips up if I can. I might even press my top leg, over my bottom leg in order to create some more pressure. Although this right here, it's a sharper tool. So in this case, what you'll see me do is actually place my top foot down on the floor. Just give it enough pressure so we can work the knot off and allow that autogenic inhibition to take place, which will relax the tension. Finding a spot, sitting on the spot for 30 seconds or 30 breaths. Switching sides, taking your time. This is something that's great to do before and after working out to help prep the muscle. Immediately after doing self-myofascial release, it would be advantageous to also do some kind of either static, active isolated, or dynamic stretching or exercises, depending on what you're going to do next and what level you're at. So the first level would be that you would be doing self-myofascial release on any identified tight muscle groups, being careful not to roll on any muscle groups that we've identified to be long or weak, because that would further lengthen them. And then from there we do some, more corrective, again, this is more of a corrective stage, where we're going to be doing some static stretching next. Again, you're kind of going into a stretch after you do the foam rolling routine, going into those same muscle groups and actually stretching, just going into a 30-second hold on those same muscle groups to allow the same effect to happen, that autogenic inhibition. Stage 2 would be kind of once you've got your body back into a greater state of balance. You would continue with the self-myofascial release on those tight muscle groups. And then on those same muscle groups, you'd actually do more of active isolated stretching, which is where you're using reciprocal inhibition. So for example, if you were to be stretching your hip flexor, you'd squeeze your glute, you'd squeeze the opposite muscle to help intensify the stretch. Same deal, you'd be breathing through that for, again, a good 30 seconds. And then finally, that third stage is going to be probably before competition, before a race, something like that. You're going to start with the self-myofascial release about an hour before the race. Immediately after, go into some dynamic exercises. Maybe just a few of them. So that might be butt kicks, that might be sumo squats, a lunge variation, something to get the prime mover muscles that you're about to use specifically, getting those tuned up. Now what I've done is I've actually placed that double lacrosse ball on my back, and I'm kind of allowing it to get into those areas right along the spine. And you might want to play around with your hand, your arm movement. Try your arms over your head. See how far your arms can fall. Try your arms laterally, opening the chest. And now I'm getting into it with the roller. Finding a spot where I feel tension and sitting there until that tension just melts away, until that tension dissolves, because that's kind of the feeling I get, is that it dissolves under the roller. Next, I'm going to grab the single lacrosse ball and I'm going to stick it underneath my bottom, but to the right or left of that sacrum, that very bottom joint in the spine. And then I'm going to sit up tall and allow gravity to just press down into that ball. So again, it's kind of right to the side of that bottom bone down your spine. And you're relaxing your legs. You're not holding tension in your quads, relaxing your butt muscles. What this is doing is we're trying to get a release around the SI joint, which is another area where we can find tension, where we found tension in my body based on these assessments. If if there's tightness around the SI joint, that could pull the pelvis into an anterior pelvic tilt, depending on the direction the muscles are pulling, depending on the direction that the muscles are tight versus the direction where the muscles are too long, perhaps. So we're just sitting here, nice gentle breaths, and we'll switch. Next, I like this one for the Achilles and for that lower part of the calf, as well as it does touch on the hamstring. I don't really need my hamstrings to be any longer, but it does happen to touch on those. You know, I don't mind because it helps me to put more pressure into the Achilles more than anything. What I'm doing here is, again, I'm sitting up nice and tall, and I'm just sitting down into the roller. And I like to place the roller as far up towards the back of the knees as possible before I sit back, and then I basically sit on a spot towards the right hand side. I kind of lean towards the right, find a spot, hold that for 30 seconds, lean to the left, hold that for 30 seconds, roll myself about an inch, you know, just a small inch towards my heels, and do the same. Right, left, roll down an inch towards the Achilles, some more, right, left, all the way down until I get to the base of my heels. So I'm kind of working at where the Achilles attaches, which is more of the mid-calf, behind the mid-calf, all the way down to where you get to the heel. And I'm being careful to sit on the spot for a good 30 seconds to allow that tension to dissolve. Next, I'm going to get to my lats, so I'm going to place that roller right underneath my armpit. And the reason for getting to the lats, even though we know that my issue predominantly is a calf and ankle issue, is that we still, as a runner, I still need to have healthy, supple lats, which means that I can't have tightness there. Otherwise, when I'm running, that motion is going to create even more tightness. So it's still important for me, even though it's not a predominant issue, to work out my lats. So strengthen and stretch. What I'm doing here is I'm rolling back and then I'm rolling forward along this roller here. And I also like to get the pecs here as well. So what I'll do every time is I'll actually roll forward until I hit that area right in front of the shoulder, between the shoulder and the neck. And I'll just sit there and I'll just allow that autogenic inhibition to take place on the pec for about 30 seconds. And then I'll get more into going back to where the armpit is and back behind my body. And then I'll keep working my way inch by inch towards my hip, right? I'm not going to go down that far, but I'm going to work myself slowly down in that direction. As I roll forward, find a spot, hold for 30 seconds, roll back, find a spot. And what you'll find when you're rolling back is you're kind of working along the scapula. And just recently we'd noticed that I didn't have that much scapular motion. So it's definitely good that if I have some stickiness around the scapula joint, to get in there with this foam roller, see if we can release some tension and get those knots to melt away. Sometimes I'll put my top arm behind my head, my elbow up, and that kind of helps to create some more pressure downward into the roller as well. That feels really nice. Other side, here I am getting into the right pec, just leaning down into the roller, finding that spot that has the most tension, whether it's within the pec minor or pec major, which can also be a problem when someone's arms are falling forward. And we're getting into that space, releasing that tissue so it can lengthen and allow the shoulders to be pulled back. Something else that will help pull the shoulders back is obviously activating those muscles that are long. So the mid and lower trapezius, the rhomboids, which would pull the back, pull the scapula on both sides back and down, pull the shoulders back. So you can see how those will come into play. Getting into the lat, rolling back. I might take that top hand behind my head, elbow up. That's another technique. Finding that spot and then just sitting very still for 30 gentle breaths in and out through the nose as that tension dissolves. I'm going right into a lat stretch here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my left arm, I'm going to point my thumb up, and the roller's probably around like my forearm area, and I'm going to pull myself into a posterior pelvic tilt, most importantly. So I'm going to pull that tailbone under, and that's going to help lengthen the lat on that left side. I might even kind of make myself into the shape of a banana, or at least try to. In other words, my right hip is dipping down, my left hip is dipping, it's kind of raising up as I'm creating more of a bend, more of a stretch, or more of an arc along that left side of my body. And then we'll switch again, about 30 breaths, getting into that posterior pelvic tilt, creating the length, bending the body, bending those hips over to the left perhaps to create more of an arc along the right side of the body. And then I just love this one, taking both elbows on the roller, letting my head come down, my chest come down. And again, just allowing my chest to really come down towards the mat, sinking my hips back. Fantastic tricep stretch, also lats. Try to reach the spine long, reach those hips out and away and down. Let the chest come down towards the mat. Another I like to do on the lats is taking a shorter roller, as you see here. So it's a little higher than the last one, and doing the same thing. So I'm going to place my arm up on that roller, and then I'm going to sit my hips back, moving into a posterior pelvic tilt, creating length in that lat on that left side. And switching over to the right, pulling that tailbone under, moving into that posterior pelvic tilt, and just creating some length along that right side. I do enjoy this one. This one's kind of getting into an area that's, I feel, even though the hamstrings are long in my case, I'm not wanting to lengthen already long muscles, there are knots that can be found closer to the joint themselves. So in this case here, I'm looking at kind of the upper hamstring area as far up as I can, and I'm kind of rolling laterally to find some kind of a nasty spot to sit on for 30 seconds. So again, as you can see here, the roller is very high up on that right hamstring, close to the femur bone. Next, we're going to get into that TFL, that tensor fascia latae, which is part of the hip flexor family. And what you're going to do is you're going to kind of start in that area that's in between the hip and the pelvis. There's that muscly area in between those two bones. Then you're going to kind of roll on the ventral or anterior, that front side of that muscle. So it's a small pocket, but just once you get there, roll yourself to more of the front of your body and see if you can find a very slight tightness. For me, it's not anywhere near as intense as other areas on my body, but it's one that's important to be worked out. And of course, I'm going to sit still on that spot, and then from there, from that TFL spot, I'm going to slowly roll forward onto the what's called the upper quad, or the rectus femoris muscle. It doesn't take very long to get there. So once you're at that TFL spot, you kind of roll yourself slightly forward towards your knee, you're going to find a spot that's pretty intense, most likely. Or in my case, my quads are tight. My glutes are long, they're not active. That's part of what we're going to be activating is the back side of the body, the glutes, the hamstrings. But in my case, the hip flexor complex is tight. So the quads as well. So right now we're getting into that rectus femoris area, maybe even vastus lateralis, the other part of the quad, a huge part of the quad, more of the front of the quad. One muscle that typically will be a problem if someone's knees are going in, which is potentially still a problem with me when I'm in motion running. That would mean that the VMO, which is more of the medial part of the quadricep, the teardrop muscle, that muscle is actually underactive or weak. And that if that muscle could be strengthened, the VMO could help pull that knee back in proper position. So again, in this case, what we're looking to do is we're looking to lengthen the rectus femoris closer to the hip flexor up top, the hip flexor itself, as well as vastus lateralis, the larger portion of the quad, which we know is tight. Also a cause of the my body falling forward. So again, just kind of find a spot, allow that single spot to melt away and dissolve under you, using your breaths. Be sure to keep the abdominals nice and toned here. So we're not just allowing our low back to completely arch and anything like that. So even in these positions, I'm still very aware of keeping that shallow C shape in the trunk of my body. So I'm bringing my front hip points up to meet my ribs. Nothing very hard. I'm just making sure that I'm not dipping into a low back arch or an anterior pelvic tilt. Why would I want to do that? So be aware of those things. Now after messing with those rectus femoris, the vastus medialis, that quad area, I actually turned my body to get into that upper adductor. So I'm starting at the top, as high up as I can. I've rotated my body, and I'm again just allowing my leg to be nice and straight, the leg that I'm working the tightness out of. And what happens is when the muscle relaxes, I find that my knee actually bends, which is interesting. So I do like to start with my legs straight, not tense, but just straight. That way you can actually feel as the muscle, as the tension dissolves, the leg is starting to bend. It's kind of interesting. But keep the body as still as you can as you hold for those 30 seconds per spot. And you can work that inner thigh all the way down till you get to the area right above the knee, if you can. Switching sides, moving over to the other TFL, that spot in between the hip and pelvis, and then kind of moving towards the front of the body, sitting there for 30 seconds, being sure to get that spot first. Once you've hit that for 30 seconds, then you're gonna slowly roll put that roller more towards the knee. So you're slowly gonna roll forward until you hit that first point of tension, and then you're gonna sit there. And that's gonna be your rectus femoris on the other side. Just taking your time. 30 seconds per spot. No oscillating, no big movements, no small movements. Just sit very still per area until the tension dissolves. After vastus lateralis, moving on to the adductor, starting at the top of the inner thigh, working your way down with as much time as you have, getting at least one spot. Next, I'm moving on to the neck, and I'm going to want to basically make sure that I have enough length in muscles such as the scalenes along the sides of the neck, which could be tight, part of the problem pulling the head forward. Us being in this digital world, our head's pulled forward very much. So we need those muscles to be lengthened, as well as the muscles, for example, the deep cervical flexors at the top of the neck, muscles that are typically lengthened because of that state to be activated. So we're going to be doing that at some point next. For now, what I like to do here is take the roller behind my neck, bridge up, and then rotate my head one direction. So let's say left. And then I'm going to go ahead and find a spot of tension there and sit still. And I might kind of press my hips up higher once I get to that spot to try and find a spot. So again, the first step is bridging up, then looking to one side, then finding a spot and sitting still. Then when you've completed that, you'll go ahead and actually, without turning your head, sit your hips down. Change go ahead and rock your head left to right. Put your head back center, bridge up, and then turn the head to the opposite direction. So just being very gentle with the neck. I would say some people may not like the amount of pressure that this particular roller would put on their neck, but I'm used to it because I practice this regularly. So you may need to have, not a firm foam roller here, maybe more of a soft foam roller. But just know that the muscles along the sides of the neck are typically short, especially when you have a forward head posture. Someone that's on their phone a lot or working in front of a computer like myself. So as you can see here, when we've identified tight muscle groups, we want to use the foam roller to release the tension there. And conversely, those areas that we've identified as being too long or weak, we need to have some kind of a strategy on activating and strengthening those weak spots. The last thing I want to show is something to do with, again, kind of fixing these, the calf, the ankle issues. So someone whose arms are falling forward when you're doing an overhead squat assessment, the body is falling forward. Something that's also potentially not active enough, too long, weak would be the anterior tibealis, which is on the front of the shin. And this is also a muscle that helps to concentrically accelerate the plantar flexion, or dorsiflexion, which I am not very good at. Dorsiflexion is when you're bringing your toes towards your knee. Your heel is reaching out away from you. So what I'm doing here is I'm actually trying to disassociate the contraction that's happening with the anterior tibialis and the quad hip flexor complex. So, a lot of times, again, when the anterior tibialis is weak on top of the shin, what happens is a larger muscle group, such as the quad, right? The quad muscle group right above it, helps to make that muscle action happen. So what I'm trying to do here with this band is I'm trying to focus on the neuromuscular connection with my brain to the anterior tibialis to get that muscle to turn on, as if you're using a channel changer, right? So I want you to basically do, if you can, as much as a 14-second, kind of a, 14 seconds up, 14 seconds down. So a very, very, allowing the muscle all opportunity possible to contract. Going slowly so that the quad doesn't come into play as quickly as it has been, most likely. And what I'm also focusing in on is really reaching that heel out and away, pulling almost the bones on top of my foot that area, not so much my toes, focusing on pulling kind of the area at the top of the foot, in the middle of the foot, towards my shin. And I'm doing it very, very slowly. So if you guys can do up to 5 sets per leg of these this anterior tibialis strengthening with the band, could be very helpful to help increase plantar flexion, or sorry, dorsiflexion. Plantar flexion is when you're pointing your toe. Dorsiflexion is when your toe is coming back towards your shin. So as a runner, you know, before when you're about to press off your foot, your backside mechanics, basically you have plantar, you have dorsiflexion in your foot, right? And then you have knee extension, hip extension, but that's the backside mechanics of running, of sprinting. So it's very important to be able to have a healthy amount of dorsiflexion as a runner. Someone who, and even functionally, someone who is not a runner, someone who is picking up things off the floor, just doing regular household chores, that dorsiflexion movement in the ankles is important so that we feel comfortable doing anything. So it's just definitely even more important if you're actually trying to do something competitive with your body. So again, just taking my time. For me, this is something that is that's something that I have enjoyed adding before and after a run or a track workout, to help make sure I'm protecting that area, not causing it to go back into a dysfunction as soon as I fix the problem. So these things take maintenance, they absolutely do. And like anything good, it's just going to get better with time. I sure hope you do use this video and that you will benefit from it. And I hope you have an awesome rest of your day out there. Bye.